what are the soft values? Well, welcome, nurturing, being nice and not offending. You know? And those are, you know, in their place are good. But there's also what I might call more the hard values of challenge, calling people to a life of virtue, calling people to a life of character, calling people to a life of impact, calling people to a life that pours itself out in the tough arena of life. And so what I would hope could happen as the lens begins to change is that we become much more agents, not just of comfort, but also of challenge. So this is what I mean by the problem of focus, the problem of the lens, okay? So it's moving from a needs orientation to a mission orientation. It's moving from kind of a therapeutic culture to a mission culture, moving from the church being exclusively an agent of comfort to being an agent of challenge, where virtue and character become central. And so the assumptions, the problem of assumptions flow out of the problem of focus. The church tends to be very inner-oriented and directed. Very maintenance, institutional maintenance, and needs become the focus. Let me tell you the story of one sad incident, which I think reflects this all too common reality. Many parishes have become very inner-oriented with regard particularly to how they see the laity, parishes, dioceses, whatever. In a Chicago parish, a call went out to the laity to become involved as volunteers in the various ministries of the parish. As you would imagine, what are they looking for? They're looking for lectors. They're looking for ministers of care. They're looking for catechists. They're looking for Eucharistic ministers. We're looking for people to help with RCIA. All very needed. A good number of people responded by volunteering for these ministries. You know, maybe, I think the number was around 70. And so a lay person puts out the parish publication, newsletter, and says, the banner headline, 70 people leave the ranks of the pew potatoes. "70 people leave the ranks of the pew potatoes." Okay, what are some of the assumptions inherent in that? Okay, that presumes that anyone who does not get involved in the institutionally sanctioned and directed ministry of the church are shirking their duty. Pew potato. This means that the full-time mother with small children is shirking her duty. This means the father and mother who work from 40 to 50 to 60 hours a week, who perhaps themselves have small children, who does not volunteer, is shirking their duty. This means that the CEO or the lawyer or the farmer who pour out their lifeblood in their work is shirking his or her duty. We have collapsed mission and ministry into the inner life of the church. Huge problem. Then we have the problem of language. When we speak to people, either in our conversation or in teaching or in preaching, in a language which they do not tend to use, we obscure what is possible to happen. We all know what discernment is, but most people don't know what discernment is. They might have some vague notion of what it is. They know, though, that they need to make some choices and decisions in their life guided by what is really deep and significant in their life. They do know about that. But when we use language like discernment with people, you lose them. They're not there. Or vocation. When there is language that speaks about vocation to the official, recognized, acknowledged ministry of the church without strong and consistent language that calls all Christians to their calling, there is a problem. When we use language that doesn't connect or in any way excludes, that's a problem. So you have a problem of language, a problem of assumptions, a problem of focus. And these are very much connected to the first. I think we're going to move now to what does the church scattered need? Okay, what does the church scattered need? And we'll move through that, but before I do that, I'd like to stop right here and just take a little moment to hear from you. You know, what has been significant in what we've been talking about here? What has relevance to your issues? What perhaps connects to how your thinking has been moving, maybe over the weekend or just in your own life? Huh? So just a short period, maybe about 5 minutes for a little conversation. Then we'll take our break and take up with what does the church scattered need? Okay? Okay, what struck you? What's significant in all of this? Is there anything that speaks to you? Yes?
Truth and not my prejudice.
Truth and not my prejudice, okay?
I think the church scattered is reflected in the people that I see on a day-to-day basis that are CEOs and lawyers.
All the time.
People that feel disconnected and disenfranchised.
Yep. And in a sense, you are more church scattered than most.
Right.
Exactly. Okay. What else? Yes.
It's a question of evangelization out there.
Evangelization out there. Exactly. In the world.
Well, that the church is supposed to be at the service of these, the church scattered rather than us being at the service of the institutional church primarily.
And I'm going to give you an image of church and of parish that is very different. I'm just throw it out now and let it kind of germinate for you on the break. Not the church as a community. Not the church as a country club, certainly. Not the church as a hospital where people go to get healed. But the church as a campaign headquarters. Okay, as a campaign headquarters. Okay? Yes, one more.
Just to say, Dr. Mills, I think what you're saying is, when you talk about these evangelical churches before, this is what a lot of these evangelical groups have that we don't. A sense that of church in the sense of mission. That why these workers for your brother put in the honest day's work are enthused about their jobs, and so because they see what they're doing in the world as of his mission.
Very much so. And they give them what I will start my reflection on is they give them a practical spirituality.
Right.
Practical spirituality. Okay, I don't want to keep on. You've been sitting a long time. Let's get back in 15 minutes, 25 minutes. Hopefully we could be finished by 12 and no later certainly than 10 after 12 because that's a pretty intense amount of time to be sitting and hearing and listening. Okay, so we're moving on to what does the church scattered need? Yes, they need to have the key transitions in their life celebrated, ritualized, sacramentally cared for, initiated, birth, marriage, death. But they also need something that they don't tend to get enough of from the church, and I would say it's this. Leadership which leads them towards the sanctification of the ordinary. Leadership that leads them towards the sanctification of the ordinary. In basically 3 words, this is what the church scattered needs, and one's a very little one. A practical spirituality that really connects with their life. Now, there will be 5 areas of focus, and I'm drawing these from Greg Pierce, who comes out of the Chicago church tradition. I didn't develop these myself, but they're excellent, and I think it captures kind of the scope of it. The first one, what is the meaning in what I do? Yeah. First one, what is the meaning in what I do? Is there any meaning in my work as a housewife, as a parent, as a laborer, as a rancher, as a businessman? What is the meaning in what I do? And so what does this call for from the leadership? Well, the leadership has to help people to develop a spirituality of work and of calling. Okay? The leadership has to be about helping people develop a spirituality of work and of calling. Secondly, not only do I have to be helped to find meaning in what I do, but also where I am, how do I deal with others? My co-workers, my spouse, the other Little League parents, the supplier, the customer. There's much better reflection going on in continuous quality improvement in society at this point than there is in the church about this. So I think that's, how the church is at service of the mission. And it's, see, God is active out there in all kinds of ways and in all kinds of non-church, non-even clearly spiritual ways. And that, for me, continuous quality improvement is God working through people to bring God's project forward. So what is needed here and how I deal with others? But what people are looking for is some very basic ways that they can develop a spirituality of communion, of communio, where because of our communion with the living God in and through Christ, there comes a way of being that connects us to others in particular ways. And it also has to do with developing a whole spirituality and to some extent a theology of solidarity. Solidarity understood as an abiding interest and commitment to the common good. That needs to be developed. It doesn't just happen. Thirdly, how do I balance all the spheres of my life? How do I balance being a worker and being part of a family and being part of an extended family and being part of a community and being part of a church? And so what is being called for there is the development of a holistic spirituality and a Sabbath spirituality. It's a great book called The Overworked American. Where work becomes the dominant facet of life rather than an integral and important part, but not the only or dominant. Fourthly, how do I decide what is right or wrong? People are asking themselves that. Not the obvious things, but those which are perhaps more ambiguous, the gray areas. So what is the moral vision which informs the building of good character and virtue in our everyday? What is that moral vision which informs how we are being created in our everyday activity? How do we become people of character? How do we become people of virtue? And then the fifth one and last one is, how do we make the system work? You know, on this 4th of July, as we celebrate a system that, as imperfect as it is, by God, you travel around the country, around the world, and you say, hey, this is not too bad, right? There's some very good things about it. There are some bad things about it, but there's some very good things about it. So how do we make the system work? You need, therefore, that calls us to is developing a spirituality which calls people to civic virtue. That's so weak right now. Civic virtue. A virtue of engagement with the political, cultural life such that, we become a force for the common good. Which is what? Solidarity. That's what the virtue of solidarity is. So all the while, as we kind of cultivate this growth in people, attentive to challenging the systems and the cultures of death embedded in our society, while promoting the systems and cultures of life. Okay? So yes, there's a prophetic dimension to it, but there's also just the dimension of the cultivation of virtue. So what does the church scattered need? Well, it needs all these things, and it needs church leadership to be about helping them. People are asking, then how are we to live? That's what they're hungering for. They're hungering for anything that can give them guidance and leadership. And so what they need is they need insight into the spiritual tradition. They need leadership. They need inspiration. They need to be taught how to be in the world, but not of it. How to be effectively engaged with all that is the realm of life and culture, such that secular sanctity can begin to be born there for them. And so they ask, what are the disciplines? What are the challenges? What are the ways that we're going to do this? And I'd like to give you an example of a place that has begun to do that to some extent. This whole building up of solidarity and a spirituality of communion doesn't just happen. It comes out of an intentional and somewhat concerted effort. It needs to be cultivated. There is a place I was attached to not too long ago called St. Edward's University. And it was a place in decline. It was founded by Edward Sorin along with Notre Dame University by the Holy Cross brothers and priests. Notre Dame was thriving. St. Edward's University in Austin, Texas was declining. It was almost gone. The decline came very strongly in the 60s and 70s. Enrollment was down. The financial situation was dire. Even the historic, beautiful main building was unusable because the floors had gotten, something structurally. So the city had condemned the building. They couldn't even go into it. They didn't have the funds to repair it. The likelihood was that this institution was going to be closed if something serious didn't happen. So what happened was that they brought in a leader of vision, a good deal of talent. Her name's Pat Hayes. She took the presidency. And when she took the presidency, the school had little visibility and virtually no connection with the greater Austin community. It was its own little ghetto, its own little Catholic whatever. And not vital, not thriving. Well, something happened in 10 years. The school is now thriving. There are so many applicants that they have to limit enrollment. The physical plant has been vastly improved. The new building has been totally redone. The main building, this historic building, totally redone. It's kind of a centerpiece of restoration, beautifully done. And so what brought about the change? What was it that, here was a place in decline, and now it's a place that's just being touted as, a great, innovative place, one of the top colleges now. The faculty is on the excellence track, etc. What happened? What brought about the change? Well, Pat Hayes, when she first got to Austin, one of the first things she did was join the Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber of Commerce, And, there's not too many Catholics there. It's mainly Protestants in Austin, Texas. Yeah, Catholics might be 15% of the population. She joins the Chamber. Within 2 years, she was the president of the Chamber. She expected, following her model, that all those connected with the university would be reaching out to the community through civic involvements, on boards, as volunteers, so that if you're an administrator there or you're faculty, we just expect that you're part of the community out there. She reached out to the business and civic community with an authentic spirit of connection, with an authentic spirit of partnership. She was constantly talking partnership. I'm here to partner with the city of Austin. I'm here to partner with the businesses of Austin. I'm here to be of service. The university is here to be of service. That same business and civic community, mostly non-Catholic, responded. I mean, they were thrilled. St. Edward's is well on the way to becoming now the model university in its mission to serve society. She had the spirit of solidarity. And out of that spirit came the connection, the relationships, the partnering that has brought St. Edward's University to be who it is now. A vital place, a dynamic place, a thriving place, a growing place. She has a mission orientation. So that's an example of somebody who has actually managed to turn a big university around, in not that long a period of time. And I think it has to do with this focus on mission and of service and on partnership with the greater reality, where the mission has a church. In this case, the mission has a university. So what would need to happen for this to move in the direction that I'm pointing to? Well, as I've said, one thing that has to happen is to move from an overemphasis on the church gathered to a focus on the church scattered. So first we have to build into our consciousness that when we're talking church, we have to have in mind the church scattered. Two, at least. So what this means is that although the church is a people gathered around the Eucharist or the parish, there also needs to be another focus. Lay people in their ordinary lives of family, of work, and citizenship are the church in mission. The church scattered in the world. This, by the way, is the vision of Gaudium et Spes, the pastoral constitution of the church in the modern world. More of our parishes need to become Gaudium et Spes parishes. I'd like to put up the mission statement of one parish that has truly taken this on. This parish began as a very, again, it was almost gone. There were like 3 or 4 registered parishioners in a very poor neighborhood, and this pastor, Jack Wall, took it on. Now it's like, I don't know, probably 3,000 families. It's huge. It's got incredible outreach. It's first school to open in the city of Chicago came from this. And this is their mission statement. I'll read it to you since it's kind of small. Particularly the first sentence is the most significant. The mission of Old St. Patrick's Church is to serve the life and work of the laity in the world. That's it. That's the mission of this place. To serve the life and work of the laity in the world. That summarizes what they're about. Not too many parishes can say that. And they are a dynamo, just a dynamo of mission and of life. And it's in Chicago, downtown Chicago. Their liturgies are excellent. See, like Monsignor Hillenbrand, they realized, and Jack Wall is in the tradition of Hillenbrand, where do the people touch the life of the church? Is it in the continuing education programs? No. Is it in the movements? More. Is it? Where is it? In the liturgy. It's in the liturgy. So the liturgy has to be powerful, dynamic, connecting, beautiful. The liturgy. That's the vision of Gaudium et Spes. There would be no place for the pew potato mentality. You know? And so, yes, we need volunteers to do things, but somehow there has to be a strong focus that what we're about is the empowerment of people in their vocation, in their life, the marketplace, the home. Because when you do have the pew potato mentality, what you are discounting is the mission of the church scattered. The mission and ministry of the laity as sacramental presence of Christ and His church in the world. Let's go back to the other thing that I threw out to you before you broke. We have to shift from seeing the parish and the church through the image of community or the metaphor of family to seeing it as something more dynamic and outer-oriented. Yes, we are a community. Yes, we are a family. Yes, we are a place where our needs are being taken care of. But perhaps the accent could be put more on the parish as a campaign headquarters. You don't build a campaign headquarters in order to have a campaign headquarters. You build a campaign headquarters in order that the people who are the real actors in the campaign workers, can come and get what they need to go out there and do what they need to do, which is to get that man or that woman elected, and to have their vision of life enacted. So the campaign headquarters exists for the sake of winning the campaign rather than for its own sake. So the campaign headquarters is very, very important, but it's not the end. It's the means. Yeah, the people who are going to be the campaign workers out there need the expertise, the support, the empowerment which happens at the campaign headquarters. The focus, however, is on what needs to happen out there. What would happen if you had a campaign headquarters, all the campaign, get as many campaign leaders in as you can. And so you have this huge number of campaign leaders, and then get everybody in there. And that's it. That's it. We've done it. We've succeeded. Let's build a bigger campaign headquarters. A more beautiful campaign headquarters. Hey, let's just, create this mega world here. A more beautiful campaign headquarters. Hey, let's just, create this mega world here. Well, maybe at times you need that, bigger and better. But it's always bigger and better for the sake of what needs to happen out there, the mission. Now I'm going to get into what needs to happen in us, interiorly, to become better able as a church and as individuals to cultivate this whole perspective. And this was already kind of exemplified in that example I gave you with St. Edward's University. We need to develop certain habits of the heart. And that's a term that is very old. It probably comes from France originally. And it was used by Alexis de Tocqueville as he looked at our country, and he spoke about certain habits of the heart that he saw in American life. And so he's the first to highlight the individualism that's inherent in American culture. But what needs to happen is the cultivation of certain habits, of certain attitudes, certain ways of being that create a certain perspective, certain approach to life. What I call is it's the habit of the heart of connection with the secular, connection with society, connection with the great issues of the day. Now, how does connection happen? And I think connection happens when we obviously enter so deeply into the Christ reality, into incarnation, that we develop, and one of the great disciplines in that is the discipline of developing deep listening, transformative listening. So I'd like to do a little brief reflection with you on communication, but particularly deep listening. One of the things that one of my teachers taught me once, and I believe is very true, that a lot of people have it, that communication is about saying something to somebody and them understanding it. And that's a view of communication that probably has some merit, but doesn't take you too far. The real power in communication comes in deep listening. The real power. Because what you can change, you can't change others. You can change yourself. And deep listening provides a power in communication that is really significant. I think Pat Hayes, in her offer for partnership, included within that a deep listening that then profoundly affected the relationships with the civic community. Connection comes from communication, and communication grows from our listening. What I'm suggesting to you is that in terms of a practical spirituality, a great way to go in this is to take on communication as a spiritual pathway. And I'll try to say what I mean by that. Communication as a spiritual pathway. If you decide to do this, you will find it very demanding. Because most of us, although we don't realize it, fear true communication. We build walls around ourselves to keep out what disturbs and challenges us. We create zones of denial. A very deep spiritual issue for anyone is the issue of living in a fear and a reluctance to hear what would shake our foundation. When we live in the walls that keep the truth out, remember what I said to you from John 8:31. If you make my word your home, you will be my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So what I'm talking about is an issue of faith, ultimately. An issue of trusting life and communication so deeply, truth so deeply, that you open the barriers that keep you bound. Very often when you have people in a state of just resignation, particularly. When you ever find an organization or a group of people or an individual resigned, it is a crisis of faith. There has been a loss of trust and a loss of hope. And the crucial element in that very often is a lack of willingness to enter into the dying that is required and that could come about through opening oneself to the truth as heard through life and through others. We have stopped believing, if we ever did, that the truth will set us free, particularly the challenging, inconvenient, and uncomfortable truth. Communication as a spiritual path. That's what we're talking about. I'd like to give you a brief example in my own life of how that manifests itself in a very superficial way, perhaps, but I think it'll give you an example. An example of the type of listening that I'm talking about here occurred with my 15-year-old son. He listens and appreciates alternative rock and roll. Those of you who do not know what alternative is, it's kind of a blend of punk and a blend of particularly punk and mildly. You had the punk rock came out in the 70s, late 70s, I think, early 70s. Well, it's kind of an ameliorated punk. It was Nirvana and Red Hot Chili Peppers and, on and on.
Those are foreign names to a lot of the group.
Well, this is very big in our culture. This is real big, and this is a form of music which didn't attract me much, just like you, and in fact, it kind of repelled me. It seemed cacophonous, and the values in the lyrics seemed totally off to me and whatnot. Well, my wife and I challenged ourselves to take on a posture of curious listening, and we asked them to tell us about their music. I've got another son who also listens. This was difficult, but it was very important because this was a whole realm of life that we weren't attending to that was very important to them. And he began to share with us some of the songs which meant the most to him. And what began to grow in us is an appreciation of it. Because some of it is actually pretty good. Poetically and as a profound critique on American culture and society. The conventionality that kills life. The violence that is rampant and deep within the society and in the individuals. Well, in my listening, what happened is a new connection with my son and a new connection with the youth culture of our time. Cultivating connection as a habit of the heart. And particularly looking for those places where you have either written something off, somebody off, some project off, resigned yourself to something, or are actively holding something at bay through assessment or through incarnation. Cultivating connection as a habit of the heart. It might call the liberal to listen deeply to the conservative. Might call the conservative to listen deeply to the liberal. It might call the whole church and each of us as individuals to deeply listen to the culture. It might call us to listen deeply to youth and to their music. It might call us to listen deeply to the life world of the laity, in order then maybe to speak a word that connects. No matter how strange or off base another's perspective might be, there is something in it that needs attention. One of the disciplines what might cultivate in, if one takes on communication as a spiritual path, is to listen for the kernel of integrity or the kernel of truth in what anyone brings. No matter how angry or no matter how strange or no matter how off-putting. What if for a whole 2 weeks you decided to make it your task to listen for the kernel of integrity in some aspect of life that you have tended to discount? What would it be like if as a whole group you took on some discipline of some kind that was communication oriented and based? Our organization, the Center for Development and Ministry that I'm a part of, the Institute is part of, took on as a task to give up the right to be offended for a period in Lent.
Right, no, what was the last?
Giving up the right to be offended.
Right.
You give up the right to be offended in our interactions and in our communication. And so we use that as a way of breaking through in communication. So we started exploring the question, do I hold it as a right to be offended? Yeah. It's got to do something with ego, and it's got to do something with, holding my view as somewhat, So we did a whole exploration of what happens to communication when you give up that right. It's different. I would hold that one of the marks of St. Francis of Assisi is that he gave up the right to be offended.
You're exactly right.
He gave up that right. He was radical in his willingness to engage that which disgusted him. The leper on the road.
Perfect.
Where did perfect joy come from? Out of his willingness to embrace that which repelled him. Might try giving up the right to be offended sometime. To cultivate connection as a habit of the heart, which is what Francis did, we must cultivate a habit of profound listening. Listening beyond our spontaneous and initial assessments and reactions, which distance, which shove people away, which Very difficult. Very, very difficult to do. So let us return a little bit to that original exercise that we did. If there were one thing that the church could do which would have a profound effect on the world, what would it be? Okay. You know, if the church listened profoundly, if we listen profoundly, if we became a people as a church that empowers the 55 million people to experience themselves, to see themselves as apostles to the world and in the world. Wow. Wow. This is the vision, I think, that comes out of this institute. It's the vision that comes out of Monsignor Reynold Hillenbrand. Yes?
I said you were talking about the campaign rally. Look right in back of you there. I mean, this is...
Yes.
This is what she was doing.
That's right.
How to get the people mobilized to get out there in their world.
That's right. That's right. So, yeah, there's many things we could be doing, and many things would be good. But can we create apostles who can find the sacred and can bring the sacred to the ordinary? To the ordinary. So as far as the pastoral function of the church, it has to be a pastoring which enables the church scattered. So what I'm proposing is that the way to fulfill the mission having a church is to place focus on the laity in their mission as lived out in the ordinary circumstances of life. And the internal disposition in that has to do with a profound listening, with a profound connection that moves us beyond where we have been perhaps. Let me just say a few words about leadership and all of that. One of the most important roles of the leader, I think, is calling people to become who they need to be in order to fulfill the mission. And that means often disrupting the patterns that they've invested themselves in that trap them into not becoming who they need to be. So one could say that the most crucial task of leadership is gaining skill in disruption. But you know, you begin to disrupt the patterns that people have invested themselves in that don't bring life to them and don't fulfill the mission, what happens? What happens? Alienation. They get alienated. They get angry. You know, they start. So whenever a pattern in us that we've invested ourselves in begins to get challenged, there's two reactions: fight or flight. We'll come out but and they'll find your buttons that, your weak spots, and, they'll attack mightily. They'll be like mighty lions attacking. Or they'll retreat. They'll leave. They'll get out of the circumstance. They don't want to deal with it. They're not going to deal with you. Fight or flight. So part of the trick of leadership is finding out what the other, in the deep down reality of their lives, really wants to fulfill and needs to fulfill. And that has to do with calling, vocation. And the leader has to align themselves very powerfully with that. The leader has to say, I know you have something special and unique to contribute here. And in order for that to come alive, to reach its fulfillment, something needs to die. And I want to partner with you in that. I want to engage you so deeply that the Paschal dynamic is engaged in our interaction. And the Paschal dynamic is really the cross, isn't it? And it's all about entering into that dying, which will create the new life. And that is discipleship. Okay? That's deep discipleship. That's the discipleship that partners with the other for the sake of mission. That's the partnership that enters into the other's life so deeply that you don't let the other off the hook for the sake of the mission. That's tough love. That isn't nice. Because nice often is a masquerade for cop out. Nice is a masquerade for, I don't want to be uncomfortable, challenging you. I don't want to. I'm not willing to do it. I don't love you enough. I don't love you enough. I'm not willing to enter into the mess that the disruption will bring. I don't trust God enough to know that out of the other end of the mess will come life, will come fulfillment. No, I'm just willing to stay, resigned to you being a mess and to me being comfortable. The challenge of leadership. And that leadership is most heavily on those in the authority position, but it's also on each one of you. Both. So learning how to disrupt in a way that life can come. Okay, I would like to, 12? Good Lord. The sim response. Oh my goodness. Well, let me share real quickly one last thing, because I think this has to do with the sim response. This was a homily that was rendered by Monsignor Dan Cantwell at Monsignor Hillenbrand's funeral. He said this: liturgy is the service of God, but so is the struggle for social justice. Priests and bishops are called to Christ's work, but so are lay and women, and just as indispensably. The sanctuary is a sacred place, but so is every factory, every workshop, every bus station, every cradle, every bed. I think that is about the sim response. And you have all afternoon to talk about the sim response. So let me end this with a quick story. A quick story, and then we'll have to go to lunch because lunch is at 12:30. And this story is a Jewish story, first told by a rabbi. And this story has something to do with what we've been talking about. There was once a man born into a miserable village in a cantankerous family, married to a caustic wife, and they had produced together 3 impossible, unbearable, inconceivable children. Awful. And each day he prayed that God would lead him out of the miserable Egypt of bondage into the promised land, where all that he longed for in acceptance and mutuality and in love and community would be given to him, because he knew where he was awful. And it seemed that he had heard God promise that there would be a day of personal exodus for him. And so he began to squirrel away whatever valuables he could in preparation of this day, of his own private liberation. And his family grew all the more bitter, living in inexplicable poverty. And at last one night, in the midst of the night, he heard the voice of God clearly saying to him, "Tomorrow will be the day of departure. Tomorrow you will walk 2 days in the direction I point. And you will arrive at village and family and wife and children and neighbors. They're all you've ever longed for and prayed for." So excited was he that by early morning he was waiting at the village gate with his bag of valuables, and he walked the day every step he could take until utterly exhausted he fell to the ground in the midst of a great forest. He set down his bag of valuables, was about to drop off to sleep, when a terrifying thought struck him. What if, being as exhausted as he was, he would be turned around in the night and he wouldn't know which way to walk in the morning, and he'd miss the blessing God had promised? So he rose, took off his shoes, and set them in the path as markers pointing in the correct direction, and went to sleep. In the midst of the night, said the rabbi who first told this story, a passerby came by, undoubtedly an angel, and turned his shoes around. Well, he rose the next morning, ate his crust of bread, and praising God, stepped into his shoes and set off. So full was his excitement that he walked at double speed. So the sun was just beginning to set when he saw the outline of a village in the horizon. He said, "Blessed be the God of creation. Behold, he's prepared a village for me that looks just like the village of my childhood." And so he moved into the pathways that headed towards the gate, and he said, "Great and marvelous are thy works, O God. The faces of these people are faces I recognize, and they answer to the names like I've known, but how different they appear." They were smiling. I mean, what else could they do? Here he was, incandescent with joy. The first time they'd ever seen him like this before, ever. And so he passes through the gates. As he goes, he says, "Let us see if God's handiwork is not so generous and so great, that there will be a house just like my house, a wife just like my wife, and children just like my children." And he stepped through the gate and up the pathway, and it was so. And he opened the door, and there, to the startled faces of the family inside, he poured out all the gold on the table. And he said, "I've come to bring happiness to this household from this day forward." And says the rabbi, it was so. Thank you very much.